Sometimes when we begin to question our faith or have doubts about our tradition, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert. When we take a step back and honestly evaluate organized religion in the 21st century, many times it doesn't make any sense. The more we cling to it and try to save it, the worse it becomes. In addition, widespread abuse, cover-ups, and victim shaming cause some of us to question whether it will ever be right again.
The Desert Sanctuary was created by Carl and Laura Forehand. It consists of a podcast, a blog, along with Carl and Laura's writing.
We're happy you're here. Welcome to the show. Good morning and welcome to the Desert Sanctuary. I never know how to start these things, whether I should say hello, good morning, good afternoon. By the time people listen to this, who knows what time of the day it is.
That's right.
So I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Carl and here we are doing our thing on the weekend. So
yeah,
how things going?
Well, I think they're going okay. This won't be true when we air this. I mean, by the time it airs, but the book Out in the Desert, Thriving Outside of Organized Religion is $2.99 right now. So it's up like at number 3 in its category. That just makes us happy. I mean, because we started off this book almost 3 years ago.
Right.
And we gave it away for a long time on PDF. And then we finally published and we've marked it down twice just because we want it in people's hands. We want people to have the discussion, whether they're inside or outside organized religion. We want them to have the conversations.
Right.
I don't want to force everybody to think exactly like me. But I think we want to have that discussion at least because there's still trauma inside of organized religion. There's still stuff that needs to be fixed and seems like it's hard to fix it inside the organization. So we want to have some discussions and we hope the book will do that. And so far that's been happening to some extent. So
right.
I'm glad about that.
Yeah.
But this, we're not here to talk about the book. We're here to talk about, we've kind of titled this, it's sort of like Derek Zoolander in the movie Zoolander, where he has the Center for Kids Who Can't Read Good and who want to learn to do other stuff good too. So our series is kind of like that. It's things we don't understand and we want to understand them better. So we're focusing on some of these things like we talked to a tarot reader. We're going to talk to a witch. We're talking today to a mystic. And Dave probably has some other identifiers he can put around his name as he tells his story. But we wanted to talk to people like that over the course of a month and a half here. And hopefully these will be some good conversations and we'll learn a lot about things we don't understand and want to understand better. So tell us about Dave.
Yeah. So Dave the Mystic, also known as Dave Barnett, is an energy medicine practitioner, healer, and intuitive with over 40 years experience in Colorado. He has multiple technical degrees and is truly a rocket scientist. In the early 1980s, Dave had some turning points in his life that led to a passion in discovering and developing his gifts in multiple forms of energy healing. He embarked on a path of training in many modalities and developing conceptual understanding of how the different systems work, complement each other, and support spirituality. Dave has gifts in healing, reading the Akashic Records, I hope I pronounced that right, energy and entity clearing, changing core beliefs, karma burning, and discerning spiritual gifts. Dave continually seeks out new modalities, learns and experiences them from their practitioners, and frequently highlights these on his weekly web radio show. Dave is a strong believer in health issues, having many potential causes in different energy planes. Dave works with many spiritual guides and communicates with them freely. Welcome to the podcast, Dave. We're grateful that you're with us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. This is always a treat. I'm usually on your side of the microphone with my own show, so this is fun to be on the other side and get to talk about me.
Right. Exactly.
I haven't figured out yet which side is harder, which side has the more challenges, but definitely, for us, those of us I'm speaking about, we're both introverts, in different ways. Laura's better at speaking, even though I was a pastor. But there are things that challenge us sometimes, and we're just glad you're here. We believe our job is to listen to people's stories. We think those stories are sacred, and it's our job to believe their stories and hear them. A lot of the stories we've heard over the past few months have been stories of trauma, of people that had to tell their stories about how they've been wounded and so on. And it was so enlightening, so much we learned from listening to those stories. And so for the past 240 episodes or whatever it is, we just feel like it's a treat to hear these stories. And today we want to hear yours, Dave. We want to hear in whatever detail you want to give it. Just tell us what you think and what you've been through. And we may interrupt you, but probably not. We'll probably wait till the end and then we have some more questions.
Okay. Well, first off, just a very broad statement. I've had so many wonderful spiritual things happen to me in connecting with Source or the Creator that I'm truly humbled by the gifts I've had in this life. And I do feel blessed, and I feel like the big hands have come down frequently in my life and guided me and moved me forward and helped me to understand and come up with ways to explain it to other people who may have a different conceptual framework. So I've truly been blessed where anything I sit down to learn, it comes very easily to me. Frequently I found I can read one book and be an expert in a subject, and I just feel blessed with that. But if I go way back to my childhood, I was the youngest of four boys, and my dad started out as an industrial engineer. My parents met at Northwestern in Chicago, and I was born in Evanston. I was born in 1955, just to give readers an idea of my age. And after a few years of doing engineering, my dad decided he wanted to become an Episcopal priest. And so he worked half time while he went to seminary, and he ended up getting ordained in 1959 and took his first assignment as an assistant rector. We moved from Chicago to Wichita, Kansas, and that's where I did most of my growing up. My dad worked at a mainline church, a big church, the social church in Wichita, where the movers and shakers went. And then the rector who had hired him and brought him on left to go become, he was nominated to be a bishop in Oklahoma, and left my dad out in the cold because a new rector would bring in his own staff, and my dad wasn't in a position to be considered to be a rector. So my dad talked to the bishop and ended up taking over two mission churches in Wichita. And he did that for several years. And then, sad to say, he fell to temptation with some of the people he was counseling. And it came out, and my parents got a divorce. And my dad went back into doing his management consulting that he'd done before in Chicago. And so about that time, when I'm in the sixth grade, seventh grade, my mother on a lark went with a neighbor lady to go have an astrology reading, and she just assumed it'd be like the slim down ones in the newspaper. You'll meet somebody tall, dark, handsome stranger, and she was quite impressed. The lady told her evidential stuff, things like, "Oh, I see you broke your left arm when you were 5 years old," and "Oh, you have a mole on your upper right thigh." Things that were evidential. And my mom, being a lover of knowledge, and she had a degree in industrial psychology herself, decided she had to pursue it. And so she and her friend, and then she met a number of other people. That was one of the few metaphysical things in Wichita you could find, is that there was a national astrology organization there that conducted classes. Well, going through junior high and senior high, I became the test subject for my mom when she wanted to try other things like Ouija boards or table tipping or pendulums, things like that. Things that my older brothers all joked and called my mom Madam Zelda, and they threatened to get her a turban with a big jewel on the front to tease her. But I went along with it. So I was open to the idea. This was the age of Uri Geller and Rhine cards, with the university on the East Coast that was looking into psychic stuff. And so I just kind of tucked that away. I knew in 5th grade that I wanted to become an electrical engineer. I discovered electronic parts, and I was, again, very gifted. I was in a gifted and talented program. I learned how to assemble and disassemble electric circuits, and I built a shortwave radio kit when I was in 6th grade. And a couple of years later, I built a ham radio and became a ham radio operator in the 8th grade. And I did it on my own. I didn't have any mentors in my family. None of my brothers are technical. And it was just, I was clearly on the path to become an electrical engineer. And I went to Kansas State University and I got my bachelor's. I went to Michigan and got my master's, and it focused in bioengineering. And then I ended up going to work for General Motors north of Ann Arbor for a couple of years. Decided I wanted to get out of Michigan. We moved back to Wichita, and I worked for Boeing for a couple of years. So I went from automotive to aerospace. And then Martin Marietta came through town in 1981, hiring for Denver, and I got an interview trip, and I loved Denver, and we moved out here, and we've been here ever since. Well, a fantastic event happened in 1983. I went to my 10th high school reunion, ran into an old friend there, and he said, "Dave, did you become an electrical engineer like you expected?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you think it's possible to change things at a distance?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" Well, he kept hemming and hawing, beating around the bush. And he said, "I'd rather just show you." And so we went over to his house after the picnic. And the first thing we did was we walked up to the electric meter on his house. And he said, "Do you see how fast the wheel is turning?" And I said, "Yeah." And for listeners, the speed is proportional to the amount of power you're using at that moment in time. And as I'm watching the wheel, and he points at it and says, "Now," and the wheel slows by a third. And he said, "I did this to my mother's house several months ago, and her bills are still lower." Well, this is interesting. We go inside. He has a little black and white TV on rabbit ears. Keep in mind, this is 1983. And he puts it on a snow channel, no tune station. And he points at the TV and says, "Now," and he tunes in a station. Wow, this is even more remarkable. And we went over to a stereo. He was a disc jockey at an FM radio station. They had a very nice stereo, and it had the little volume meters on it for left and right channels. And he said, "Do you see how the needles are moving with the music?" Well, obviously, yes. Music gets louder and the needle goes up. And he points at it and goes, "Now," and the needles went 180 degrees out of phase with the music. So when the music got louder, the needles went down. Well, this is really getting my attention. He said, let's go back out to the car. I want to show you something. And we sit in his car, conventional ignition. It's idling. His hands and feet are off the controls. And he points at the engine and says, "Now." And he's slowing down the idle to the point where the car is stalling. And he said, "Yeah, I can stall other cars in traffic, and I've done it." Well, wow. Wouldn't we all love to have that capability for some of our situations? And the final demo for that day was we went to his FM radio station. It was a 50,000 watt station. We went in the back room where they have all the meters for the transmitter status and health. And there's one there that was digital and is reading 99.6. And he said that means that 99.6% of 50,000 watts is going out of the antenna right now. Okay. He said, "I can lower the power." He said, "I can't lower it very much or I'll trip the station off the air. It thinks there's a fault." And so he said, "Do you see how it's stable?" I said, "Yeah, rock solid, 99.6. And he points at the meter and says, "Now," and it drops to 99.2%. Well, 0.4% of 50,000 watts plus the overhead power to get that out that antenna is it's just phenomenal. Now, I can't recall reading about other people with psychokinesis capabilities who can do anything like this, where he would get an effect every time as a measurable effect, and you could see it. And to top it off, I felt like the big hands had come down because they gave me a demonstration in my area of expertise, so I knew it couldn't be faked. I was an electrical engineer. So I returned to Denver feeling like I had sort of a revelation and guidance, and I said, I've got to learn about this stuff. I can't ignore it. And so even though I kept my day job of being an electrical engineer, I started taking energy healing classes through Therapeutic Touch. I took psychic development classes and met a number of people there that I ended up meeting weekly for a year to practice with. I joined a group that was channeling ascended masters out of the Tibetan tradition, and so I learned how to channel. And all these things just kept moving forward, but I had to keep it pretty quiet. I couldn't reveal it to my aerospace cohorts. In fact, later on, psychics who I know, used to joke about me being Clark Kent and Superman. I had to wear my disguise at work. Mm-hmm. And so I just kept developing the gifts. And about 1998, I started getting readings from others where spiritual beings were coming down saying, basically, you have to up your game. You have to move forward. I was in a position in 2000 to leave Lockheed, and I went to a small renewable energy company. And in 2002, I was really motivated to start meditating seriously. And I set the intention. I said, I'm going to seek enlightenment. I don't know if it will happen in this lifetime. I don't know what it looks like. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. But what happened is spiritual beings started showing me different techniques. They started giving me exercises. Some of the exercises I followed for a year. And then I left that renewable energy company in 2003 because I won some contracts with the Air Force for R&D. And then a voice just like us talking said, okay, you have all the time you need, all the money you need. Now go out and learn everything you can about healing. And so in the period of 2003 to 2007, I studied a whole lot of different types of energy and healing modalities. I started having other gifts come through, like reading past lives and Akashic Records. I had 2 years of mentorship from a Denver medium, which built on my skills. And in 2006, is March 18th of 2006, on a Saturday morning, I'm meditating, and my guides in my meditation took me through some initiations, and then they took me through a major event in there. And I said, is this what I think it is? And they said, yes, are you ready? And I received my enlightenment. Well, being the skeptical engineer and the show me engineer, I spent the next 6 months looking for validations. I went to multiple readers, and without telling them the outline, I said, is what I experienced valid? And they didn't know what I was asking, really. And so they would bring back information from different spiritual guides. And I finally had a chance to meet face-to-face a medium who I highly respect as being wonderfully accurate and insightful. And he said, yes, of course you got it, Dave. And it came easy because you've done it in other lifetimes. And that really moved me forward. And other gifts started coming through, such as doing karma burning for people's past lifetimes. The energy and entity clearing showed up. That was kind of a chance thing where I was on vacation in Las Vegas with my wife, and a woman called, and she said, I'm a friend of your daughter's, and I have an entity of some type in my house that's causing a lot of grief. It walks up behind me and says my name. When I'm laying in bed, it presses on the covers, and my kids see witches flying out of closets now. And she said the backstory is we got this house. It was a really great deal. It was in a suburb of Denver. And she said after we moved in, then they told us why we got a good deal. And that's that the previous owner, an older man who was somewhat of a recluse, had hanged himself in the basement. And sure enough, he was still there. And that was my first clearing. And I learned some stuff out of it, read a couple books, and that kicked me off into doing clearings, which I've been doing ever since. And I estimate I've probably done over 3,000 clearings now. I do that routinely. Dark entities, demonic things are quite prevalent. And since 2012, the numbers have gone up exponentially. And that really seemed to be a vibrational shift. And I just take it that this is happening because people are getting motivated to come out into the open and to be motivated to learn spirituality and to learn their moral stance and their moral compass. So I see this as part of the big plan. So all those things happen for me. I continue to develop gifts. I've done my own blog talk radio show for close to 12 years now. I've done 600 shows, and I continue to do healing. I pretty much left engineering in 2018 and finally felt that I could hang out my shingle and do this without any fear of needing to be anonymous doing it. And the heavens have just blessed me with essentially a full-time job doing this now. And my background includes electrical engineering. I also have a degree in psychology. I also have a master's in computer science. I've studied a lot of the early church, looking at the theologians' writings on it, not a specific church denomination. I find a lot of things, maybe like you're alluding to, where I disagree with them in organized religion. A number of years ago, I went to see some theologians. This is in the late 1990s in the Episcopal Church, who were presenting their book and giving talks after hours in the Episcopal Church I was going to at the time. And wonderful stories about what things really look like. And I talked to both of them separately. I said, why don't we hear this on Sunday mornings out of the pulpit? And they said, what you're hearing on Sunday mornings is 150 years old. And it's there because everybody's grandparents heard it, their parents heard it, and they're hearing it. And if they suddenly started changing that, they would lose attendance. And so they said, we just can't. And yet, I read books like Bishop Spong, where he was kind of a renegade in the Episcopal Church, and he wrote one book, Why Christianity Must Change or Die. And his position was that women bring families to the church, the men sit there, and these days there's so many professional men that they get bored and they say, this is a bunch of fairy tales. I can't take it anymore. And he said that's a major problem, and something has to change or it's going to fade away. It's not going to be relevant.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of my story there. So
yeah, it's good. And kind of piggybacking on what you were just saying, the mystics in the history of the Christian church were always not believed until they died, and real later on, then they would kind of pay attention to them. But you call yourself Dave the Mystic. So in your mind, what does that term mean? What is a mystic?
I wanted to come up with a description, and that was the best I could do. And it was sort of suggestions out of the spiritual plane. To me, what it means is I have a very high level, high spiritual connection to the Creator and to the spiritual realm, with the beings in there who assist the Creator in managing things. And I look at the Creator. I like one of the statements in a Joseph Campbell book, and I think he borrowed it from Schopenhauer, where he said, one of the most healthy things you can do is to keep killing off your God. And what he meant was, as you increase in understanding about what the totality of the Creator or the universe looks like, you'll continue discarding your previous image or model. And I've gone through that countless times as I have new levels of understanding. So, it gets to one of those things like the Bible or Enlightenment used to say, if you can discuss it, you haven't had it. And if you can't discuss it, you have. And, so to me, it's, I have these connections to the universe, to understandings. I journey to other universes. I work with ETs. in the spiritual plane. I'm sometimes called to negotiate truces between warring groups of ETs and other universes. So I go a lot of places. I do a lot of work, and a lot of this is going to sound fantastic to other people, but the number of times when I've gone to other mediums and just said, "This is what I'm seeing. Do you see it?" And I get confirmations, and so I just move on with it. And I tell people frankly, look, I'm practical. If this stuff didn't work, I wouldn't be hitting my head against the wall for 40 years trying to make it work when nothing was there. It works enough of the time, and the results come through enough of the time that I believe that it does have an effect, and I am, beneficial to others and myself.
Mm-hmm. And that the way you're describing that, is what I'm newer to the discussions and so on, but I understand a mystic to be one that experiences some, you go by your experiences. This is what I experienced, instead of this is what I was taught to think or believe, and so on. One of the things we were taught, I would consider an Episcopal background to be a low control religion, as opposed to what I was raised in, which is a high control religion, similar to a cult and things like that. But we were taught, basically indoctrinated, to consider everything that we didn't understand to be frightening and scary. And Laura's raised in a less control religion, but then she married me and got pulled in. But we still both indoctrinated with that thing that this is even like when I started doing yoga as a pastor. I was a pastor for 20 years, and I started doing yoga, and people would say, "Oh, watch out for that. We need to watch out for that yoga," And I would say, "Why?" And they all quoted the same thing that they got when they Googled yoga, which was an article by a Baptist pastor that read one book about yoga, kind of, and assumed that something bad was going to happen if I did yoga. Why should we? So the question is, after all that, why should we not be afraid of things like this, in your opinion?
This is one of the things I use for people on this, because I've run into people who've told me, Dave, in my healing classes, they said, if you don't believe in dark entities, there aren't dark entities. It's only your belief that makes them happen. And this is the model I use for them to help them understand it. I said, I can't sit down and physically see microbes or bacteria or viruses, but I accept the fact that they're there, and I take appropriate protections to not have a problem with them. And so I said, just because you can't see these entities, we are surrounded by a big, very energetic universe, and they seem to have an effect. If you call this simply a metaphor that we have a spiritual plane and we have lower planes and we have dark entities and they can affect us, okay, fine, that's a metaphor. What if you want to call them free-floating bubbles of consciousness that have different motivations and can get near us and affect us, because we do detect consciousness in other people, so we probably detect consciousness in things that we don't necessarily see. Is that more acceptable to you as a model? In the book, The Field by Lynn McTaggart, she ended up interviewing a whole lot of physicists because she wanted to find out about this thing called the field that they refer to. And a frequent question she would ask them is, do you believe in God? And they say, oh, no, they just poo-poo. No, God. She goes, okay, do you think that there is a universal field of energy out there that has consciousness and sets up boundaries and creates rules and restrictions? They said, oh, absolutely. You say potato, I say potato. They accept the fact there's something out there, much bigger and more organized than we see. The other thing that I find very humorous is when hard science types like physicists and others say, oh, there's no such thing as psychic or any of that stuff, telepathy. It's all nonsense. It's all magician conjuring tricks. But oh, by the way, we believe that 96% of the universe is dark energy and dark matter, which we've never detected, and you can't see it and measure it. And we want you to believe in that. Excuse me? Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so where's your smoke and mirrors coming from?
Yeah. We want, I think in religion, we want to believe that God can cast spells, but no one else can. And
yes,
there's a wide variety of things like that.
Well, there's that classic statement where Jesus said, "These things that I do, you will do, and you'll do greater." And what did he mean by that? To me, that's a very literal statement. And what was he?
Can I interrupt you? Do you think Jesus was enlightened?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I believe he had training from the Essenes. I think there's a good chance he even made it to India and had training from gurus there. And this helped open him up. And, he found his divinity. Whether you want to argue, with the Catholics, was he half man, half divine? Was he born divine or just a man? Whatever. The thing that I always find funny about that is the Catholics had a real hard time because, back in biblical time, they believed that men were the ones who carried the seed. And in your semen, there's a tiny human, and you planted that in a woman, the fertile field, and it grew to be a human. Okay, so that means that when Mary got pregnant, the Holy Spirit came on her and planted that seed in her. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, a little problem with science coming along says, oops, women have eggs. Oh my goodness. And now suddenly the Catholic Church is dancing on the head of a pin about, is Jesus half human, half divine? Did he start out fully human and then become, all this stuff? And it's like, I don't care.
Right.
He was a magnificent person who, for whatever the Bible tried to do to describe how great he was, they were at a loss for words. Mm-hmm. But for his popularity to expand and grow, and for that energy around his followers to be able to go out and do ministry, there was something very special about him. If you choose to say that he's fully divine, I don't care. That's fine. I think we're all divine. We're all in the image of the Creator. He was a way shower. The early name for his program was The Way. Christianity is a description for clubs who follow the Christian concept. They were clubs. They weren't churches. Nice. And there were many different views. There were many different views.
You got an amen from the balcony here.
Club.
About so, I think he was profoundly spiritual and enlightened, and I think he's one of many that we've had as in various times in history to come along. I think the Buddha and his enlightenment process and what he came to show and the writings he left behind are very profound. So there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. And here's one of the problems I have with organized religion. I'm a product of it to some degree, is I've never heard of a minister in a church taking somebody to the side and saying, this church can't satisfy your needs. You're ready to move on to something higher. And I'm going to suggest you go see this highly spiritual person. He's not in an organized religion, but he can coach you and help you really move forward, because this church does not serve where you're at now. It never happens. This church is good for cradle to grave, and please don't ask any questions, and accept the dogma, and you'll check the box. You'll be great. You'll go to heaven. Mm-hmm. Blah, blah, blah.
And in some cases, that church is making it worse.
Yes.
And proliferating trauma that they might have came in with, but there's not room for their grief, and there's no processing or helping them move forward.
Here's a funny story for you. I started working with an elderly man who's retired, and he was going to draw up the plans for an addition to our house. He was a retired graphic designer and a relative of my son-in-law's. And when I met him, he was on oxygen, and he said, my wife died years ago. I'm so ready to join her. My daughters keep trying to hang on to me, but I'm ready to go. And sure enough, about 3 weeks later, he passed. And I went to his funeral at a Lutheran church, and they had a young minister up front. He's like maybe 28, 29. And he's up there and, talking extemporaneously. I can just imagine Bob, going to the pearly gates. I can just imagine Bob walking on those streets of gold. And I'm sitting there. I've already gone to see Bob. I've talked to him. He made it just fine. He's integrating just fine. What kind of spiritual leader is it for you who professes to lead people to the spiritual plane to say, I have no idea what it looks like other than a fairy tale? I don't go there. I can't meditate and go there. I can't connect with those people.
Right.
What does that say for a spiritual leader at the front of a congregation, especially at a service honoring somebody who's passed? To me, it just seemed ludicrous.
In our new book, I wrote a chapter about what I want Laura to do when I die. And one thing is, don't invite a pastor to officiate my memorial service because I don't want him promoting his personal beliefs and anyway, all of that. The question I wanted to make sure I got a chance to ask you was,
please do.
As I meditate, and I sometimes do, YouTube type meditations about spirit guides and so on. And I've never had a personal session like that with anybody. But as I do that, it seems like it's difficult for me to move through that veil or whatever. I've heard it described in different ways. But one thing that does happen is most times when I just said and I can get still is that, something happens with my writing. Like I get a main idea for writing and how I can explain it. Mm-hmm. And then as I write, I feel like I'm discovering as I write. So I'm grateful for that, but I always feel like something's not happening the right way, or maybe it's because I haven't been taught.
Well, there are a number of gifts that start with clair, like clairvoyance is seeing. You may see spiritual beings, you may see auras, you may see energy fields. But one of them is claircognizant, and claircognizant is an instantaneous knowing when you have a desire or need for information. This is how I get information when I do past life readings. As soon as somebody says, gee, have I ever been a witch in a past lifetime? Boom, I am downloading years, locations, details of who, what, when, where. It just starts flowing in like a river. I believe that's what you're doing there. You set the intention of the information that you're looking for, the concepts, and they just start coming in. And for people when they start out with this, they say, oh, it's just my imagination, I'm just kind of creating this. And it's like, well, no, you can discern what is your imagination because it has your intention behind it versus sitting there, like you're saying, in a still way, and it starts flowing in. And so I believe that you probably have a gift of being a claircognizant, and you obtain information this way.
I have a lot of thoughts. So I wanted to speak to you were talking, and it reminded me of something that's still really, really fresh. A really, really fresh memory for me. So, this was years and years and years ago. My grandmother, who I feel and still feel a very strong connection to, she had passed, and I was awoken in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was. It was the middle of the night, and to her at the end of my bed
Yes.
and telling me that not to, like, she was happy, like
Mhm.
all was well, like not to be sad, not to be concerned. Like, how would you describe because it was very, I mean, I say it was real. Like I say, I saw my grandmother after she had passed.
Yeah.
And I feel that there's still this very strong connection, you know, between us. And she's been gone for a very, very long time now.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, can you speak to that? Like,
Sure. There's a couple possibilities of what happens when people pass. Some people, when they pass, they may be afraid because of their training of going to heaven that they'll be rejected. Some of them don't know there's an afterlife, and they're sort of like Bruce Willis in the movie Sixth Sense. They wander around puzzled, wondering why nobody will talk to them. Some of them may have been addicted to something, and they're afraid if they go to the spiritual plane, they won't be able to satisfy those cravings because they're still thinking in terms of a physical body. So that's one group, and when they stay around, they hang out in the astral plane, and frankly, they're just as stupid about spirituality as they were when they were alive, just as naive. Another group, there's actually a couple more categories, but another group instantly goes to the spiritual plane. They see the angels holding out their hands. They're attracted to the light. They may see relatives. They're escorted, and they quickly integrate into the spiritual life in the spiritual plane. There's a few who are given the opportunity to hang around for a little while. They're going to go to the spiritual plane. They may have minders with them to help escort them, and they may hang around and visit some people after they die, and they may attend their own funeral because they have a fascination to see what people would say about them. And this is seen as a positive thing in the spiritual plane. Everybody in the spiritual plane goes through a life review where you kind of sit in a multimedia room and you get to see the significant events in your life. You can rerun them. You can even stand in the other person's shoes to see how they felt. If you're either particularly nice to them or particularly harsh, you can get that. It's not meant as a punishment. It's meant to help you understand how that life compared to the goals you set before you took on that life, because you do have essentially a life chart that you follow, and it gives you opportunities and challenges. So one other possibility is some people psychologically, they are so bound up in their life and or the physical body that if they go through either something like dementia or they go through a car accident, something like that, they aren't quite prepared psychologically to just be tapped and given a brand new physically healthy body in the spiritual plane. So they go into a sham hospital, and it's called being cocooned, and they feel like they're in a hospital bed. They see doctors and nurses. They get visitors. As far as they're concerned, they're still a human person. And then after they gradually, over a length of time, get used to the idea, then it's broken to them that, yeah, you've left the earth plane and you're in the spiritual plane. Are you ready for your brand new body? And typically it places them in a body that's in perfection. It's in the 20s in terms of an age, and sparkling healthy, and doesn't suffer for lack of anything. This cocooning is why sometimes you lose a family member, and the following week you go see a medium and say, I just lost my mother, I want to talk to her. Well, she's not available. Okay, that's why. She's been cocooned. She is still going through a process here, and it may take anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months before she's available. So there's several things that can happen when you pass. But this experience of seeing somebody show up when you're in human form, you have several layers to your aura, and one of them correlates very closely to what your physical body looks like. That stays with you for a little while after you die, and that form can be the one that shows up when you see somebody in an after-death appearance. It happened to my mother with her second husband. He'd had a stroke. He was in the hospital. They were hoping for his recovery, but she wakes up one morning at a nearby motel at 4 a.m. and there he is standing at the foot of the bed, and he smiles at her, kind of gives her a little bow, and then he disappears. And then the phone rings, and it's the nurse saying he just passed.
Wow.
And so, yes, these things happen.
That seems to me like, and I felt this with my grandmother, like such a gift to give to the person that.
Yes, absolutely.
Left, you know,
absolutely.
I mean, I still feel it to this day that it was just a gift. I think I've always really struggled with dying, not so much since leaving organized religion, but I think it's always something, especially the older I get, that's in the back of my mind. And yeah, so I felt like that was a real gift, like almost like, because I was not scared. It was almost like it was a beautiful thing to see her. It wasn't scary at all. But I really do believe that I saw her.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's an interesting thing in American society now. If you do a survey of people on, have you seen either angels or ghosts? Do you believe in angels or ghosts? If they think they're anonymous, you'll get an answer rate of somewhere to 70 to 80%. If they feel it's not anonymous, you'll get an answer rate of 10 to 15%. You know, many people have had these experiences. They're just they don't know who to tell, and so they just kind of hide it.
Yeah. In the Christian culture, I don't think that's something that is, really welcome. You know what I mean? I think it's probably a little taboo. But
one thing I wanted to ask you, make sure I keep saying that, but
yeah.
one thing I want to make sure I had time to ask you was, as we're talking and you're visiting with us, we're not in person, but do you sense anything about Laura and I? I also wanted to ask you about my grandpa, but anyway, I'm also very close to my one of my grandpas. It seems like at times I can feel him. I've never had like an appearance like she's talking about, but is there anything, as you've been talking to us, when you have conversations like this, do you sense things about people?
Well, immediately when you ask that, I see a number of beings in spiritual planes standing behind you, guides. They're a ring around you, and they can have a sense of humor, and their sense of humor is such that they held up signs with letters, and it says truth. So it's TRUTH. So they're wonderfully encouraging to the two of you, especially with your backgrounds, to get the truth out there rather than the dogma, and they highly appreciate it. So you're being honored for it, and they're guiding you, and probably going to lead you to more and more people who can help you understand this and get the concepts.
What's the best way to start seeking out your spiritual guides and the things that you're talking about? You had a friend so many years ago said, I want to show you something. So how do you go about investigating this aspect of, who you are?
This is one of the things I think is very valuable. Now, these days, there's enough dark entities that I always caution people, you need some spiritual protection or discernment before you start meditating. Now, you may choose to use a prayer that I'm surrounded by the light of God, or Jesus and the angels are around me, something like that. Because when you start meditating, you can accidentally open yourself up to dark entities from the astral plane trying to get into your field. I have two statements. People can write these down from this recording. The first one is, I only connect to the spiritual plane or higher. And the second one is, I only communicate with high vibrational beings. Those two statements set boundaries. They keep dark things or even intermediate things that aren't quite in the spiritual plane from being able to get into you or talking to your head or to mislead you. But I think one of the valuable things for people starting out is sort of a guided meditation that I had years ago, and it was very helpful to me. you pick a spot you like to go to, whether it's the mountains, Mountain Meadow, or the beach, and you see yourself there. And it's important that you connect with all your senses. You feel the feeling under your bare feet of the grass. You feel the warm sun on your face. You hear the birds in the meadow. You hear or you feel or smell the flowers on the air. And a little ways in front of you, you see a small cabin. And the door is open. It's inviting. And you walk over to the cabin, and you walk inside, and there's a table with 2 chairs. And you sit in one of the chairs, and then you see that there's a spiritual being sitting in the other chair. When you start this, you'll probably feel like, I have to imagine the other person sitting there. And so create one, create a divine presence, whatever form is comfortable to you. And then communicate with them telepathically, see what messages they have for you. All along, this is going to feel like, I'm making this up. This is my imagination. Well, if you do it day after day, in a little while, one of these days, that being will be replaced by a true spiritual being that you didn't create. And that being will start talking to you. And in my case, that being ended up taking my hand and flying me out of there to the spiritual plane and started giving me tours of the buildings in the spiritual plane, like the Hall of Records and the spiritual meeting place and places where people went to concerts or they went for training, things like that. And the neat evidential thing for me is in one of the Sylvia Browne books in the back, she discusses going to the spiritual plane, and she had an artist friend sketch what she remembered that she saw. And I recognized about 2/3 of the places that she'd been in her book, which to me was a wonderful evidential thing that, this isn't just something that was made up or my imagination or anything like that, when 2 people correlate like that. So I think that works very well. The other thing, everybody talks about the monkey mind. The monkey, your overactive mind gets in the way of meditating. And I came up with a nice way to handle that. When you go into meditation, you create a thing called a monkey island. You may have seen them at zoos. It looks like a little island with a moat. The monkeys are on it so they aren't behind bars because they won't cross the water. So I create one of those, and I put a little bridge to it with a gate. And every time I have an intruding thought, I picture it like a little 4 or 5-year-old child, wants to get my attention. And, you need to remember to fill up the car. Oh, okay, thank you. And then I take their little hand and I walk them over the little bridge, open the gate, drop them off on the island, and I just tell them, you can play here with your friends, and I'll come by and wave occasionally. And if you do this for several days, a week or so, you'll find that these intruding thoughts, rather than getting bigger and more intrusive because you're trying to squash them, kill them, erase them, that type of thing, they do have an ego. If you just treat them very nice, just take a small pause, walk them over to Monkey Island, drop them off, and then come back and resume. Pretty soon they'll realize they have no power over you, and they'll go away.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
One of the things we always ask everybody, I used to ask it in a different way, and people answer it, but now I ask it different. I say, if there was a billboard that you knew everybody in the world would hear, what would you put on your billboard? What's a simple message that you would communicate to the rest of the world or the cosmos or whatever? What do you want to tell people on your billboard? We didn't prepare you for this.
Yeah. I think it would say something like, fundamentally, you are a spiritual being, and you are fully entitled to communicate with the spiritual realm.
Okay. It's good.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, this life is temporary. The model I use for a lot of people is the spiritual plane is like wandering around Disney World. You're on the sidewalks, you're enjoying drinks, you're going to restaurants, and then somebody says, let's go on Pirates of the Caribbean. And you go into Pirates of the Caribbean and you're fully immersed. You have a life as a pirate. The cannons are going off. These villages are being looted. You're getting drunk and all that. And then you come out at the end and you walk back out in the daylight, corresponding to when you die. And you meet with your friends and they say, how was it? Did you have a good time? What'd you learn? And you say, oh my, you wouldn't believe it. Let me tell you about it. And then you spend more time out on the sidewalk, you relax and try other things. And then somebody says, hey guys, look over here, we have the haunted mansion. Let's go try that. And so I think these physical lives are a training opportunity for us. They're something that the spiritual realm is very perfect, and there's a lot to learn there, but this kind of puts a spice on it. This is like living an average life in London in the 1800s, and then somebody says, have you ever thought about going on a safari in Africa? And you say, oh man, sign me up. And you go to Africa for 3 months, and then you come back and you tell everybody about it. And while you're in Africa, you learn a lot of things. You learn, oh, there's parasites, there's mosquitoes, there's wild animals. They ate some of our guides. This is this was pretty rough, but wow, I wouldn't give that up for anything. And I see that as how these lives are that we have here. This life is a temporary thing. It's always temporary. Some of the precepts in Buddhism are this life will always have aging, it will always have illness, and it will always have death. And so I love one of the statements that Joseph Campbell had about compassion, where he said, compassion is a joyful participation in the sorrows of the world. And that's how I approach healing. I understand that there are always going to be people who have health issues, and I will do my darndest to bring joy back into their life and to help them as best I can. And their healing may be all their symptoms go away. Their healing may be they can live with their symptoms. Their healing may be they die from their symptoms. And I can accept all those because there are frequently plans in place that are bigger than me. But I'll do my best to help them. And I'm not going to get dragged down by it because I have this realization. I mean, part of the enlightenment thing is I have no fears. If I get hit by a truck in the street and die today, no big deal. I'll have some regrets about leaving my wife behind, but no big deal. I know it's temporary, so it's just something. We're in a classroom here where we have an opportunity to try things. We're in a video game, and it's a great opportunity to learn things that we just can't learn in the spiritual plane because we don't have blank minds there. We do have blank minds here, and we're open to new possibilities and being creative. So I think our lives here are a wonderful opportunity. I'm very disappointed in people when they commit suicide, and I understand a lot of it's due to mental illness or other things, but they're kind of giving up an opportunity that other spirits would have said, shoot, if you don't want it, I'll take it,
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful world. It's a wonderful physical plane for us to experiment on.
Yes, absolutely. This has been a really interesting conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm sure there's going to be people that are listening to this that want to know maybe have some extra questions or
Sure.
are wondering how to get in touch with you. So can you give us kind of your information?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is go to my website, davethemystic.com, and there is a little mail form there where people can contact me through that mail form. And so, if they have questions or if they look at my material and say, I might like an appointment with you in some of your modalities, that can all be arranged. I don't have an appointment book on my website. They just have to contact me, and I'll email and set up something.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Dave Barnett, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you. This has been a treat.
yeah, for those of you out there listening, we hope you continue to be a part of the conversation, that we'll continue to love each other and grow together. And as always, we want to remind you to be who you are, be where you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary. We hope you find who you are as you embark on your own journey.
For all of us here at the Desert Sanctuary, be who you are, be where you are, and be at peace.